here to tell you something.
You can become extraordinary.
We've filmed some of the most inspirational people on the planet to understand what it really takes to succeed. In Becoming Extraordinary, we'll explore the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and relationships to help you to realize your potential.
Because greatness isn't born, it's learned. So, who can you become?
In this episode, we'll meet the keeper, an Olympic gold medalist who is voted as the world's best hockey goalkeeper, and the explorer, the world's greatest living adventurer.
Hey there, and welcome to Becoming Extraordinary, the series where we look at the most accomplished individuals on the planet to help you develop the skills, knowledge, and attitudes to achieve great things.
Yes, in this episode, we'll hear from the world's greatest living explorer, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, and as well as that, the world's greatest hockey goalkeeper, Maddie Hinch.
Yeah, but before we sink our teeth into Maddie's gold-plated story, why don't we find out what drove Sir Ranulph to the ends of the earth? So what do we know about Sir Ranulph?
Well, Sir Ranulph is a British explorer who has broken several endurance and expedition records.
Sir Ranulph served as the lieutenant in the British Army and served in the Royal Army of Oman, where he received the Sultan's Bravery Medal.
He was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire, an OBE, for human endeavour and for charitable services.
Sir Ranulph has raised over £16 million for charitable causes.
Wow. Despite a fear of heights, he is the oldest Briton to have reached the summit of Mount Everest.
Sir Ranulph is the only person who's ever traveled around the world on its polar axis.
Wow. He's also an author.
Writes books.
Cool, let's have a look.
I didn't ask to be called the world's greatest living explorer, but in 1984, we had the greatest number of exploratory records at that time. I would very much like to have done what my dad had done, which was to command the Royal Scots Greys Tank Regiment. He was wounded 5 times. He was killed about 4 months before I got born. So I didn't know him, but I got brought up by my mum on stories about him and his amazing father, my granddad. And so I wanted to be like Dad, but I failed the A-levels twice and therefore couldn't become the commanding officer. So I stayed in the British Army as long as I could, maybe 8 years. And after that, you were chucked out and got married. She didn't have any money either. So we tried to think, what had I done in the army which could make a living? Ginny, my late wife, was the one that had the plans and the projects. She would decide what we would do. She found that the Norwegians had never managed to do a bipolar expedition, meaning to go the whole way around Earth vertically on its surface without flying. So she decided we would break polar records. And the reason we went for something which had never been done before was because we couldn't get sponsorship unless it was something that had never been done before. So we needed an office in London to get this together. And the only people who might provide us one were the SAS, the Special Air Service. And for 7 years, we worked every day, unpaid, working in pubs at weekends to make a living. And we got 1,900 sponsors after 7 years.
Isn't it just so interesting that this man failed his A-levels not just once, but twice? And that is kind of one of the main reasons that set him on this path to become one of the most prolific explorers of all time.
Yeah, but we have to shout out his wife though, because not only was she the inspiration and the driving force behind a lot of the research, but she also went on these expeditions with him, so he was never alone.
It's kind of romantic.
Yeah, I mean, working in a pub and spending 7 years to do it.
And then the whole journey across the Earth took 3 years. The planning for that, to make sure that it went successfully and to lead a team over that, is just gotta be amazing.
To get the real big record, there's nothing that could outdo going on the surface, never flying, for 52,000 miles. We had been told by the Foreign Office we would never be allowed to go unless we got some actual practice in the Arctic proper. People were sort of taking bets that we would come to grief in a crevasse before we even got away from the pole. All this was sort of negative. So you have to forget about the negative and continue doing what you think you're good at. When you've set out in Antarctica, you've got to look into it very deeply and find why previous people had failed and why that was as far as humans had been, no further. Every government in the world forbids their citizens going into the interior, i.e. the vast middle bit, except for 3 months a year. So 9 months of the year, you're not allowed there because there's no rescue facility anywhere. And if you ask for rescue, you won't get it, and therefore you become embarrassing to your government. Go as far as you can in that 3 months. But part of the 3 months is when the ship can get through the summer ice. So you haven't got 3 months, you've just got maybe 1 month to get inland as far as you can go, and then you have to sit there for 9 months. You get very hungry, you get crutch rot, gangrene. Basically, a weak voice comes into your head saying, I want to stop. But it's not just your head that it's coming into, it's the other blokes. So as leader, you've got to choose the right blokes, because if he loses the mental battle and can't take it, the whole expedition's wiped out. 7 years preparation wasted. I invent my own mental way of fighting this nasty, weak voice, which is to imagine that the people I respect most, my dad and my granddad, are actually watching. And I don't want to do something to let them down.
Like, imagine the risks associated with that journey. Falling through the ice, frostbite, hypothermia. I mean, there's so many different things that you have to try and think aren't gonna happen to you. And even if they do, you have to think, how do I overcome these things? To think you're camping in freezing cold conditions, you must have a particular mental strength to be able to deal with that.
I think he's just like the rest of us. We all have that little voice in our head that tells us we can't, but you just gotta overcome that. Think about someone watching you, like he said, his father or his grandfather watching over him, and he doesn't want to disappoint them.
I don't like solo expeditions, and the only reason I do solo things is when the Norwegians have done that particular record with 2 people. So the only way of beating them is to do it with 1 person, and it always leads to disaster. Everybody knows, fall into a crevasse, you need someone else to pull you up. I would never have had to lose my finger ends if I'd had my colleague Mike Stroud with me. Anybody who has chosen a particular path, I would say follow your dream at all costs. And the only person who should make you change from that course is if you decide to change from that course, not anybody else.
That was so good. I thoroughly enjoyed what he said about overcoming that weak voice and not losing that mental battle that's going on in your head. For it's so easy for you to do that, but for him, he was like, I'm gonna control that thought, I'm gonna keep pushing forward.
I really like the idea that he's like, I wouldn't do it, but if the Norwegians could do it,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it better than them.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a clear battle between him and the Norwegians, like epic, like this guy was driven.
Just imagine how hard that would be. You're in somewhere freezing cold, you're by yourself, you're carrying heavy equipment, you've got those weak voices in your head telling you to give up, and somehow you have to combat all of that and say, I'm gonna finish exactly what I've started.
Not only that, but you have to be courageous, not only for yourself, but for everyone else on your trip, everyone else that you are kind of making sure they're okay as well, to make sure that your team is strong and can keep going.
Yeah, and I love how he spoke about his grandfather and his father and wanting to make them proud. So our main takeaways from this interview are, number 1, I would say, follow your dream at all costs. Number 2, make sure you combat all the negative voices that are inside your head.
And keep following your own path, one step at a time. That was Sir Ranulph. Now let's learn about someone else that's the top of their field.
From one great to another is Maddie Hinch. So what do we know about her?
Maddie Hinch is a field hockey goalkeeper, and she's a Commonwealth, European, and Olympic champion.
At At the 2015 Euro Hockey Championships, she saved a penalty to ensure England won the tournament.
At the 2016 Olympic Games, she saved 4 penalties in the final and went on to take the gold medal.
Maddie didn't initially enjoy playing in goal.
Oh. Well, Maddie has represented England and Great Britain over 130 times.
After a brief spell out of the game in late 2018 to recharge her batteries, Maddie returned to hockey in 2019 in some style, helping GB qualify for the 2020 Olympic Games in Tokyo. Ooh, let's have a look at Maddie's story.
My dad was in the Navy and we spent a huge number of years travelling. And my sport and my passion was actually football. I was a right little tomboy, just loved running around with the lads and kicking a ball about, and very much enjoyed being in the thick of the action. When we finally returned back to the UK and I was sent to a boarding school for the first time, football wasn't an option to play there, but hockey very much was. Sport is definitely still perceived as a male-dominated area, and I think naturally at schools or when you get started, it can give off an image that you might be a bit of a tomboy if you play sport or you want to kick a ball or whatever, but I didn't really care. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what everyone else around you is saying. If you truly believe that is the path you want to go on, then you have to stick by that. As soon as you start losing that inner self-belief, then it's a really hard, long road. And I think I knew that I was going to be something a little bit different, but I've always believed that I could do it. And almost like the more they knocked me down, the more people kept saying no, the harder I would work for it. Growing up in the Hinch household was definitely competitive, very much from my dad's side, that the kind of the sports genes, I think, originated. We were always surrounded by sports, and when you've got one younger brother, he's always trying to compete with you. That naturally gave me a bit of a drive to want to always beat him and my dad at everything. Hockey was definitely the standout sport. It was something that I clearly had a little bit more talent in than the other ones, but I struggled early doors, really struggled. I'm smaller than most of the goalkeepers around the world, and as a result, I remember the coaches at the time saying to me, you will not make it because you're too small and you're too dynamic and you just need to stay on your line and do less. And I knew that wasn't my game. So I spent from the age of 14 through till actually 18 being told by the same kind of group of people that I just wasn't what they were looking for. And then when I was 18, I got another trial for Somerset, and one of the girls that was always ahead of me, and this is the brutal reality of goalkeeping, unless you're the best, you don't play. Very last minute, she had to pull out of that tournament, and so they had to play me. That was it. Maddie, you're in, here's your chance. And I'd thankfully spent the years between 13 and 18 still convincing myself that I had something that I could contribute to this game and that there was more to it than this. So thankfully I was ready. When that chance came, I was really ready.
It is so shocking to think that the world's best hockey goalkeeper was being told by people she's not going to make it, she's too small.
How do you think it must have felt to have such a strong self-image and path of where you know you're going to go, and yet have, people tell you that you can't, to be rejected? It's just the sheer self-belief that she had to push through those years when she was told she couldn't that just shows what type of character she has.
In the year when it really mattered, the year where they decide if they're going to take you into the senior year, I wasn't selected for the Junior World Cup. Again, found myself in what some of us call like the grey area, where you're basically too old to play for the 21s or any of the junior setup, and you're not invited to be in the senior setup. So I made the decision to move from Loughborough, lose my entire university scholarship. It cost me a hell of a lot of money to go and play for Leicester Ladies, who were in the top division. And I knew if I could get myself in the mix with them, my name would travel and people would talk if I could play well for Leicester. So I made the move, and within 6 months, I had a fantastic season. And then before I knew it, I had a phone call from Mr. Kerry himself saying, Maddie, we'd love to get you down to have a trial with us with the senior team. And by the end of that year, I was offered a full-time contract. We had a test series versus Germany, and the team, you have a squad of 31 and 6 goalies, but you know who the kind of core of those teams are, and they were preparing for a major tournament. And this test series, he could have chosen any 6 keepers to play, but he chose his number 1 and me. And it came out of the blue completely. Against Germany, who I remember watching in Beijing, against some of the absolute superstars, and I was like, oh my goodness, like this is it now, this is real. I felt so small in that goal all of a sudden, and I was just, like, it was almost overwhelming, but I felt also incredibly ready. And I had, to this day, still one of the best games of my career. The ball just kept hitting me, and I grew in confidence with every save that I made, and we won that match. And I was thinking, my goodness, like, this is great. This feeling is just the best feeling in the world. Then started to believe, you know what, this 2012 Olympic Games could be within my reach. I remember we find out the team via email. I hadn't slept all night. I was back at home again with my parents and just refresh on the emails. Like, come on. It's not me. I was now 24, and really I'd never properly been a number one or felt like I was really a solid member of a team. So again, it was like, God, it's all this heartbreak, and like, when you feel like you're letting down your closest members of your family and your friends, and is it worth it, really? That's what I was starting to say to myself for the first time. Is it worth kind of the emotion? Because it is exhausting, it's draining. You put everything on the line for these like tiny moments, and then they just like shatter right in front of you, and you feel like you've got to start all over again. I was like, why does he not want me to be his number two? Like, why would the team not want me to be their number two? Am I going to be the future of this team? So many questions were coming into my head, and I was like, well, I don't know if I've actually got this in me. And that was probably the first time in my entire career that I've doubted myself. Maybe this is just how it's going to go, and I need to now make a decision as to whether I can cope with this, or is it going to be worth it? But I think what I always had at that moment was to look back at all the previous kind of up and down moments I'd had in my career, which ultimately have made me the person I am today, and I would not change it because it's made me so much stronger. So again, I thought, you know what, I fought back from that moment, and I can do it again. And essentially that's what I did after London. Both keepers retired, the number one shirt was like there to grab, and it was a case of whoever wants it is gonna get it. I felt so much more ready than the rest of the other goalies. I was like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to let one of these guys have this. Won every goalkeeper of the tournament award that year. In fact, in my first tournament, won player of the tournament as a goalkeeper, which is unheard of. I was just like, wow, I knew this is where I was capable of going.
It sounds like she had some coaches initially that weren't pushing for what she knew she could do as the best.
Do you know what got me?
What?
When she left her Loughborough scholarship and moved to Leicester. And she said that cost her a lot of money, and like that's clearly a massive sacrifice for her. But because she was so gunned on, I'm going to be a good hockey player, that's a risk that she was willing to take. And I don't know if I had received all that rejection prior to that's something I would have the confidence or self-belief to do. No,
she had clear self-belief that was so incredibly strong. She was like, this is my purpose. I know I'm good enough. I know this is going to be the way that gets me in the right eyes of the right teams. And sure enough, she got back on Team GB.
I am so grateful for this like up and down journey that I've had. But don't look at a failure as a failure. It's not, like I say, I don't like the word failure because it's more of a learning. It's just it's part of the journey. And I think the tougher the journey, the tougher you are. Almost setbacks are literally just like lessons to make you stronger. Reflecting back on the Olympic final, I think when you stand there in that moment of like holding the medal, all of a sudden I was like, right, I would like a few more of these. And it just made me greedier. Is there actually more to this now than just being England and GB's number one? Is it a case that could I be regarded as one of the best in the world? And then I started to set my sights higher and higher and higher, and I think that's what I've always done. Where can I go next? And that's where it kind of leads me to today. I went on from 2013 till this current day. I've been the number one, and now apparently one of the best in the world, the best keeper in the world. And it's where do I go from here? And I want to create a legacy from that. I want to do more and always be seen as the best and kind of step away as the best. And that's the challenge that I face now, really. Key attributes to being best in the world comes down to really three things, I think. Perseverance, resilience, absolutely resilience, and a wanting to learn attitude. Work out where your passion lies. Work out what it is you want to do. If you believe you can do it and you're willing to put the work in, then just stick at it. And just remember, really, that if you're not doing that, then someone else is. And you have to want it more than they do.
That is awesome. The line that's stuck in my head is, if you're not doing it, someone else is. And you have to want it more than they do. It's so good, it's so good. And she also said that she doesn't like the word failure. Like it's a learning curve, it's a learning experience, and that's such a good way to view it. I think a lot of things are about perspective and not necessarily about failing or not doing well. It's all perspective. So what do you think some of the big takeaways from Maddie's interview are? I definitely feel like the tougher the journey, the tougher you are is such a great quote that she said, and it's something we can all learn from.
Absolutely. And I think another big one there was just perseverance. Even when she got knocked down, she kept going back and finding new ways to get her success story.
I would also add, don't be afraid to change your plan to get to your goal.
Absolutely. You definitely have to want it more than they do.
And a wanting to learn attitude.
So having watched these two films, how do you think we can compare these two distinct people, their distinct stories?
I think they both had a high degree of mental strength. Like each of them were both able to push past whatever was going on in their head, and whatever the naysayer said, it wasn't enough to hinder them or restrict them from aiming for what they wanted to.
I agree. And also the fact that both of them failed very early on in their journey, but they kept persevering through. Really shows just how important it is, perseverance in your character arc.
Yeah. And they both did their own thing. I mean, they were both highly motivated people, and they loved what they did. So the naysayers weren't enough to hold them back.
No. Even though Sir Ranulph and Maddie had such different stories, it just really goes to show how much power truly comes from within. Resilience, perseverance, and belief really go a long way.
And remember, believe in the path that you choose. You don't necessarily have to aim for climbing the top of the mountain or an Olympic gold medal, but you have to have confidence in your own personal journey and realize that the glory, the achievements, all these things come from doing what you actually love.